Hey, this is Mike with the Mix Space. I'm really excited today to be in conversation with Tongva artist Weshoyot Alvitre. Recently, the Mix Space produced a blog about her Tongvaland art piece that was a play on the infamous Hollywood sign. Today, we're going to discuss that art piece and learn a little bit more about the art installation project that it was featured in and who the original peoples of the Los Angeles area are. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name right. It's Weshoyot, right?
Weshoyot.
No T at the end?
No T, no.
Weshoyot Alvitre, thank you for being with us here today and for joining me in this conversation. So first thing I want to ask you, a little bit more lighthearted and not such a serious question, but is there any specific artist or music genre that you're listening to right now or that's inspiring to you currently?
I listen to a lot of kind of older stuff and a lot of instrumental work. I've always been a big fan of soundtracks. Recent artists, let's see. I'm not too up on all of the recent artists, but I really enjoy Rostam's work. He used to be, I guess, part of Vampire Weekend, and then he went off and did a solo piece. But I really appreciate the scope of what he does. I think it's really a unique sound. I think he's East Indian, and he brings in this really interesting sort of instrumental just patterning to his work. And now that I know a little bit more about him as an artist, I can go back and listen to Vampire Weekend and oh, okay, I'm hearing, what he was doing for them back then. Let's see. I've been appreciating FKA Twigs. That's another artist I kind of came late to, but just what she does, and she's an amazing dancer and singer and performer and everything else. It's just, while I don't agree with everything and I can't enjoy all of her work, just what she does, it's something that I haven't really seen before. And I really kind of admire her for just kind of going out there and putting herself in the way that she wants to. It seems like she has a lot of control over what she does, which really shows through her work.
Now, switching gears, tell us who the Tongva people are, yourself included, because you are of that background, right? You are birthed out of Tongvalands. Yes. And what should people know?
Okay, so the Tongva people are the original people of the Los Angeles basin, which includes Pasadena, Long Beach, much of Hollywood, which we'll be talking about later, a lot of the outskirts of Los Angeles. They were originally called the Gabrielino people, which is a more common term by the Spanish missionaries when they first came over. And so that term has been sort of adopted and carried through since initial contact. And up until probably about the 1970s, I would say. And along with sort of a lot of the work that you're seeing now within tribal names, the people that identified as Gabrielino, they decided that they wanted to sort of separate themselves from that colonial term and come up with something from their own language in a way to call themselves. So traditionally, our people would have been identified by their village. And there were over 200 villages within our territory. So they would be associated with family clans, family villages, and then it sort of went up the tier. We didn't really have a name that identified us as a people. And so the sort of the survivors in the 70s, my dad and my aunt included, went back to the archives. They went back to one of the last speakers of our language, which was Narcissa Rosemeyer. And in some of the historical documents, she had mentioned that the people called themselves of Tovaangar, Tongva, people of the earth. And so that term was sort of adopted by those that wanted to separate themselves from the mission system. And it was very controversial in the 90s because there were several different bands of Gabrielino Tongva, mission band of San Gabrielino, and there's about 5 different sort of groups, and some of them were for a casino, some of them weren't. And in that, it became this sort of back and forth where there was a lot of in-person fighting and a lot of inner tribal politics, I guess you could put it. And since then, it has become a topic of dispute, which I'm sure people can see online through internet posts and things. And the way I really see it is I was born and raised to identify as Tongva through the work that my aunt and my family, my grandpa, my dad had done. My dad always identified as Tongva and not as Gabrielino as a way to sort of separate ourselves from those people associated with the mission and being adopted into mission culture. And so I carry that on in the way that I introduce myself and the way that I identify. However, I also respect those who are that identify as the Gabrielino. there's several other groups, and that's their choice to identify in the way that they want to. And it's really kind of interesting with our tribal group because other groups like Cahuilla and Luiseño, many of them have sort of gotten rid of the Spanish terminology for their people, and they've sort of adopted their traditional names now, and it's become commonplace and accepted. And we are still kind of dealing with that, like, I guess the blowback from originally trying to do that in the 90s. So yeah, I identify as Tongva. I also include Gabrielino when I talk now to try to be more inclusive of all the people that are part of our tribal community.
Right. Yeah. Because it's more complex than that, right? Than just a title also, right? We oftentimes want to look at people as groups and titles and put them in. So it's great to hear that. It's amazing for you to explain it that way because what colonization does to us is lumps us into groups, right?
It does.
It does. It lumps us into groups. I identify as Squalitecan, but that is also a term used to encompass large different bands of groups of people. And part of the reason why I wind up having to, or feeling that is the best way to identify for myself is because my people's, whoever were the small group of people that I came from, whether they were a small tribe or a band, we don't know them. We can't find it still, right? Still digging, still searching. It was lost probably intentionally somewhere for our protection and our safety, And then we wound up just identifying as Mexicans, and that is also another whole category of things that doesn't encompass everybody and doesn't really explain who you are really, right? So it's great to hear you say that. And, and it's also nice to hear that there's tension a little bit, right? People are trying, I think the good thing in hearing what you say is that people are trying to figure it out. And that means you have to have discussion, you have to sit with people, come together in community, maybe disagree, maybe fight. Like you were saying early on, there was some probably actual physical altercations over, who's calling what and who gets to claim what identities and so on. But I think those things are important, right? It helps further. Yeah, it helps further the conversation a little bit and helps people find identity. It
does. And I think ultimately, if we're all working towards the same thing, which is, making people aware of our land base, making people aware that there were people here long before there was, Spanish and then American government, and that all of this land that was traditionally ours, we never gave it away in any sort of treaty. There was never any sort of like sale or anything. It got taken from us first off, and then sort of handed out into the like land grant situation. And so many people from so many of the, Tongva groups, the Gabrielino groups, all of the groups, they have these histories to various degrees within the mission system. And, myself included, like when I identify, I also make note that I'm Scottish. My mom's Scottish and Gaelic. She doesn't have an ounce of native blood in her at all. And I'm very proud that she is who she is, and she comes from a beautiful culture as well. And that makes up who I am. I can't say that I'm 100% Indian, And, on my dad's side, we also have some of the effects of the colonization. We have like Spanish history in our genealogy. And so that makes for a very sort of complicated history, but something that also, if you're willing to sort of talk about that instead of fight about it, to look at how complex the situation is and why I'm actually here speaking to you. If I was probably 100% Indian, I probably wouldn't have survived any of that. It's through, this mixing that I'm able to be here and do the art that I do, be here and talk to people. And, growing up and seeing the effects of this sort of lateral violence and stuff within communities, it's really not worth it. We're such a stronger, more powerful and more beautiful people if we can come together, despite if we disagree with one another, but work towards the same goals, which is, caring for the land, caring for, our lifeways that we've managed to hold on to, and trying to pass that on and provide a space for kids and our children and future generations. And that's something that I really kind of grappled with, I think, prior to becoming a mother. And I think now that I'm a mom, it's like your whole priorities shift, it's not about you anymore. It's not about these things that bug you or you getting stressed out about stuff. It's like, what can you do for your kids every single day that's going to make them, I guess, appreciate the world around them and be more knowledgeable about that and not repeat the mistakes of the past, but also, have some positivity to look forward to as they get older. Because if all they hear is, oh, your people died, all your people were all killed, and all these things, they're going to grow up with a really sort of like difficult self-image. And, my dad instilled a lot of that, and I saw where it was coming from. It was coming from a place of pain and from a lot of trauma. And he grew up in an entirely different generation where he dealt with a lot of different things. I mean, his generation, they had like racial violence. We still have it today, but I think during his generation, it was much more commonplace and just accepted. If you were a person of color, you ran the risk of getting mugged, beaten up, killed, anything. His grandfather was in a completely different time period that he grew up in. And the violence intensity was much higher. I mean, people were literally hung if you said you were Native. And that's why a lot of them said they were Mexican, so that they could easily fit into society and sort of have a safe kind of protective layer by sort of integrating into that. So I think by, focusing on that and like understanding like we've broken down so much, but we still have more work to do. And focusing on how can you positively do that work for future generations. I think that's really what we need to focus on in order to, be good representations of the people that came before us.
Right. Correct. Yeah. And it sounds like, I've heard you mention a couple of times your father, a lot of the things that he instilled in you, how he identified, you shared earlier, how he specifically identified, right, that he took on the Tongva identity, and at least the name, right, instead of Gabrieleno, was an intentional choice of his, right? And so then he helped to like shape, craft, and help you, as a child yourself, as you developed on into figuring out who you wanted to become, and probably who you're still working on becoming, especially as a mother now, as you mentioned, right? And since you have kids as well. So I think that's a good place to transition into your actual art piece. Now, maybe that art piece, isn't specifically birthed out of, your father and what he instilled in you, but also maybe it is a little bit, right? But how did you like wind up, like, because it's not just a play on the Hollywood sign only, right? So like share a little bit about like where you wound up that process of doing that one specific art piece that we wrote the blog about.
Yeah. So the Tongvaland image, it's black and white. It's not a physical installation in any place. It's not, a disturbing of land or actual building of signage. It was literally like a digital manipulation of an old 1920s photograph, I think it was, from an archive. And my intent in doing that was pretty much my entire life, like going to all these places in LA, like hearing, oh, this is where this village used to be, or, oh, this used to be, it belonged to these families. Back in the day, they used to be able to gather acorns. They used to be able to do this. And seeing all of these places now, you have Universal Studios, you have Hollywood, you have Disneyland. What do people go to LA for? They want to see movie stars and the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And it's all so superficial because, that initial sign, the Hollywood land sign, was literally done by like a real estate company trying to get people to move out to sort of like the boonies, basically, because they wanted to put in a new housing tract. So they're like, oh, we'll build this giant sign. And, we just invented electricity. So let's like try to get it lit up, and we'll do this thing for a couple of weeks and get people, it'll be a big old advertising thing. That's what it initially was supposed to be. It was never supposed to last more than a year, I don't think. The fact that it's literally still up there and they removed the land. And so now it's just Hollywood. It's literally based in gentrification. It's based in like colonial land theft. I mean, basically, the hills that sign is on, there was a village site there, and they took out artifacts in the turn of the century when Hollywood started moving in, started doing films. There's multiple films that were filmed on those hills. I think there actually is a cave back there that probably was like used for sacred ceremonies and stuff. But they desecrated the entire land base there. And so, I was really sort of up in arms over something with, I think it was the Oscars or something else. I can't really remember. But sort of the culmination of all these years of me seeing that sign over and over and over again, knowing it's your land, I just wanted to like deface it in the only way that I could without getting arrested. And so I digitally manipulated it as best that I could to read Tongvaland as a representation of like, we are still here, for one, that's our land. Number two, this huge, magnificent, icon of Los Angeles, which is Hollywood. everything that it entails, millions of dollars, movie stars that get paid millions of dollars, the entertainment industry, all of these things, kind of summed up in like all of those things that you guys go to see is native and native land, and, you know, was never asked or sold or anything. It was unceded, it was stolen. You know, and we're still fighting to have some sort of hold on any sort of land that belonged to us prior. So that's kind of the long story of that piece. But I never really expected it to take off in the way that it did. I never expected it to be on a billboard when I, you know, collaborated with Cara Ramiro on the pieces. And I'm happy that people are still talking about it. I really am, because I think it really opened up people's present space into understanding like, oh, now every time I see that sign, I think about art piece. Or maybe, you know, the conversations that I listened to associated with it kind of made me think twice about Hollywood or the entertainment industry. So I guess if I can educate people through the artwork that I do in some small way where it changes their day-to-day relationship with a space, I think that's important to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it could also just in general, Los Angeles, right, have people thinking like anytime they see it on a map or go into it for a visit, if they've encountered your art piece, that might get them generating a little bit more thought, you know, that it might not sway what activities they're going to participate in once they arrive in LA. But, you know, it could be something that at least it starts to, you know, spark some movement in people's brains to actually consider, you know, that there's consequences for us to have access to all the cities and, you know, lands, parks, and so on that we have, because like literally almost every inch was used by somebody, right? You know, somebody's people, you know, and as you're demonstrating here, right? Like people still exist, you know, we oftentimes, and this is what colonialism does, right? It kind of erases. And then the really great example you gave earlier about, well, it's easier to identify as Mexican because then you can kind of just fall away into the shadows and not be highlighted or isolated, right? And have things impact your life, you know? So, you know, I think that's really, and then the other part is, it sounds like the process, and maybe not intentionally, like at some point in the future, I'm going to manipulate that sign. But you did talk about for, you know, years seeing things in just the general LA area, right? And thinking, you know, and somewhere in the back of your head was like, well, that was a village at some point, or this would have been a waterway that, you know, my ancestors probably used, or whatever, right? Or even the things that, you know, concretely, like that was a place where people's homes were before, and now it's this other thing. It's Hollywood or it's Disneyland, right? So it's important to hear that from you, because that's part of the process leading up to this, right? Like bits and pieces throughout your life. Oh, for sure, yeah. So it stems from where I was born. I was born on joint sort of Tongva and Chumash land in Newbury Park. There's an Indian center, cultural center now called Satwiwa, and a huge national park land. You can go out there and hike. It's beautiful. Before I was born, my dad got hired by the Park Service to sort of help form the cultural center, open it, and also serve as sort of somebody that would give talks, informational talks. He also wanted to work on a lot of revitalization and cultural revitalization. However, the sort of wokeness of everybody at that time and place in the 80s wasn't there. I mean, you were just getting over the American Indian movement with John Trudeau and with all of the stuff that happened during that. So you had a lot of this Indian activism stuff going on, and it was seen as just absolutely almost dangerous. You know, if you spoke out against things, you ended up getting like tailed by police, you got harassed, a lot of different things. And so my dad experienced a lot of those things in his efforts to try to educate people by working. You know, he thought if he worked with the Park Service, it would be sort of a good relationship, or maybe they would be supportive of those things, and it could be sort of a movement forward. And it ended up being a situation where they interrupted several like sweats that they had up there. They would constantly sort of just walk in and tell him, oh, you can't talk about genocide with these people on the weekends, you know, when you do your talks. And he's like, I'm not going to censor myself. Yeah. And so it was just a lot of different things that sort of led up to a pivotal point when I was 5. And he ended up he couldn't do it anymore. He got into it with the Park Service, and we had like a week to move from the place where I was like born. I was conceived up there. I was literally born in the little house back there through a home birth. And I lived on the land. I wasn't in school until the very last year. So I was like, 5 years of living
a space that's just untouched was tremendous. And it really informs the work that I do today. Because when I was there, we used to go walk down the canyon and stuff, and you learn about, okay, well, this used to be a site, this used to be this, and then from a young age, it kind of, I guess, directed my brain to, like, when I visit places, I think about, okay, well, who was here first, or what did this used to be, before it is the space that it is now. And that just sort of expands and expands and expands. You go and you travel to Los Angeles and you realize this is your traditional homeland, and you can't even make reference of where the LA River is, everything's in cement and asphalt. So that was really jarring as a kid. I remember going to the LA Zoo and being really excited to see animals. And we also went to Griffith Park. My dad was really into, like, showing us that space and trying to imagine what it would have been like without having that gigantic building of Griffith Park, and without, when you're driving through on the freeways, it's so overwhelming. So yeah, it's been something that I've sort of grappled with. And even now when I go and visit LA, it's like, it's really overwhelming to me, to be in close quarters with so many people, to be in these cement walled spaces. And then with the amount of population, the amount of cars and everything else going around, it's so intense. So, it's something I think about everywhere I go. Even when I travel to other countries and other, like, states and stuff, it's the same thought process wherever I am.
Right. Yeah. I bet. I mean, yeah. Once you, it's the, like, the old adage and the problem of, once you learn something, especially when it's aligned with justice, it's hard. You can't unlearn it, right? And then you wind up seeing it everywhere you go. Yeah. It almost starts to become a little bit of a burden, right? It's like sometimes it's hard to enjoy yourself. You're like, well, I'm going to go hiking, but whose land is this? I
had, like, major anger issues when I was younger, when I was a teenager, and then I've always been very cynical because of that. And so, like I said, it really took me having kids to break myself out of that sort of mindset, because then you're forced, you can't complain and bitch about stuff all the time. Like, you literally have to, like, you have to be in an okay mood and even keeled, because I have people that, these small little minds that I'm showing what the world is supposed to be, or what it could be, or what it is. And whatever I say, they absorb. And so you're really, I think, aware of your emotional state, what you get mad about, what you talk about, all those things. And even now, like, my kids are getting older and they'll say stuff to me and I'm like, oh, good job. Like, you've learned this. And then they'll say other stuff and I'm like, oh man, like, well, they picked that up. But yeah, I try to be really honest with them. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I really think that kids have a greater understanding of things than we give them credit for. And, I don't think that we should shy away from historical things. And I'm now, going through that with my daughter who's in 4th grade, and we have the mission system and stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I can either just sit back and get mad about this and not do anything, or I can try to be as active as I can in educating her, but also perhaps educating her teachers and stuff on what's wrong with the way that you guys are portraying what happened. So yeah, recently that's been a big thing the last 3 months. And her school's been very receptive, and I've been very appreciative of it, because I think, the work falls on so many people that came before me, from people in my direct family to just California Native people that have done and tried their best to do work to bring awareness to, the state-sponsored genocide, through the mission system, through all of these things that have been kind of whitewashed. And so I'm so thankful to so many people for the work that they did. And I continue, like, if I can thank them and they're still alive, like, I will thank them outright, because I couldn't be doing the work that I am doing now without all of their help and all of their work and stuff. It's too much for one person to fight any of that stuff. And I feel like, when my dad was doing it, it was sort of all on his back, and he carried a lot of that burden, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have these things. It was small little organized meetings, maybe once a month or once every 3 months or something, where people would get together from different tribal communities and discuss these things, which was wonderful. And, it had its own special thing that we don't have now, because everything's online. However, getting anything done in a positive way and not feeling like all of that weight's on your back, I think it was a completely different situation when he was doing the work than it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I've been there already with the mission system thing with my kiddo, because my kid's in 8th grade now. So we've already been through that, that whole ordeal. So that was an interesting time in his education, where I had to have a talk with his teacher. didn't go very far. There's a lot of closed minds out there. But
yeah,
since you bring up, your kids and talking about having your own children now and, what was different in the world for them, photographer Carol Romero, right, is the one that kind of put the project together with some seeded money funding from the Indian Collective, right? So tell me a little bit about like, what was that like, right? Because you produced something that other people's kids get to see, Indigenous or not, right? So what was it like being drawn into that project and going through the project a little bit?
Yeah. First off, she was absolutely lovely to work with. She's an amazing photographer, and she is so just organic in what she does. And I hadn't met her prior to this, so this was all sort of a new experience. She contacted me out of the blue. It was funny, we both applied for the same grant. I got to like the final, I think, tier, and then I got the letter, oh, sorry, we didn't pick you. And that's sort of like when you're grant writing, it happens all the time. And then a couple of months later, I think it was like maybe 2 months, and she contacts me out of the blue, and I had just sort of learned about her as a photographer. I'd seen some of her work. And so I was like, yeah, I know who you are. Like, and she told me that she had gotten the grant. And then she said she wanted to come out to California and work with some of our tribal people and work with bringing awareness to tribes that are not federally recognized or state recognized, and bringing awareness to what it means to be sort of an urbanized Indian, and maybe not by choice. So the initial concept was kind of interesting to me. And of course, I don't collaborate often with people. I'm very guarded with the work that I do, because I feel like if anybody's in control of the narrative, you're also in control of the end results. And if you get any slacker or flacker or whatever for anything, you have to be responsible on how that's going to come back. And so that's why I don't often work in large collaborative groups or collaborate at all. So she kept in communication with me, and as it got closer and closer, I was thinking like, man, I really don't like being on camera, for one. I prefer to do podcasts instead of recorded things, but she's like, yeah, I want to, I'm a photographer, so I want to like photograph you. And I'm like, well, can you do something like maybe not my face or like my hand? I don't know, something like that. So we had these conversations. She's like, I really want to work with like water. She's like, how would you feel about like, being photographed in water or underwater? And I was like, let me look that up, because like I kind of know what it looks like. I've seen some photos, but I don't know what that entails. Like, I don't know if you have to have a air pump, whatever. I was like, I don't know if I feel comfortable being underwater for long periods of time. Anyway, I did my research and realized what it was. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to say yes to this. I was like, I don't really feel 100% comfortable or confident that I can pull this off or do this, but I'm going to say yes, because she had rented the space in Long Beach, which was probably about 2 or 5 miles from Tovaangar, which is literally our creation site, our center of origin. It was a huge, massive village site, very, very important place. And these things just started happening and falling into place. And I'm like, this just seems right to do. And so I was in a saltwater pool, 2 to 5 miles from Tovaangar, under deep down. I think it was like a 12-foot or 15-foot pool. And I spent the day down there, and I brought my aunt with me because I was kind of scared in meeting her, and I didn't know if it was going to be weird. I didn't know how many people were going to be there. I was absolutely terrified. It ended up being really cool, and just a couple of people. And it was a beautiful experience. And my grandpa was an abalone diver. He was a free diver. He used to dive for abalone off Catalina. He was a Marine, but when he got back from the war and stuff, that was sort of what he used to do. He loved the ocean, and he loved swimming. And he helped build Mumatahiko, which is one of our tiats when we started revitalizing our redwood plank canoes. And I kept that in my head the whole time I was there. I was like, I'm doing this for my grandpa because it makes me think of him, and it makes me think of all of the things that he did. And maybe it'll help me sort of get in touch with sort of his headspace when he used to go abalone diving. Because it was something that he had learned from his father, who ended up passing away when he was overseas unexpectedly. And so that was what I tried to think about the entire time I was doing the photography work. We had abalones. There's a bunch of shots that didn't get included, but we were like picking up abalone shells off the bottom of the pool and putting them back up so they would sort of float down and shimmer and all these things. And she shot a ton of film, and I drove home after that day and didn't hear back from her for a couple of months until she had gotten all the photo, or I think it was maybe a month and a half. She had gotten all her film back and had picked out a couple of them. And I was just blown away with what she had done, like what she had captured as a photographer. Because when you're down there, you're in a headspace. You're not thinking about what you look like or anything. And you're trying to keep things out of the way and keep things from floating off and all these things. So you're constantly like juggling a million things in your head. But it was a wonderful experience, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have worked with her. And I still have a really kind of a hard, difficult time like separating myself from that image because of like my own personal insecurities with like just presenting myself in that way. It's so weird to me. So I almost have to disassociate myself with the photo in order to appreciate the photo. And I think it's a beautiful photo. But yeah, it's been a weird, really trippy experience. Like, and I'm grateful for all of the response to it. I mean, the community's been so supportive of it. And I ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, I think it's a beautiful representation of modern California native female. The skirt was done by Leah Mata Fragua, who's Shumash. The necklace that I was wearing was done by Miu Marufo, who is from up north, and I'm blanking on her tribal affiliation right now. The basket I was carrying was from a gift to my aunt from a Northern California tribe. I think it was all redwood or redbud material, hand woven. So it's just like all of these, you know, bits and pieces. Well, and that's, you know, kind of who we are as a people now. Like, I can't say I'm 100% Tongva, you know, like I couldn't go out there and, oh, this is Tongva, this is a Tongva skirt. But it makes it so much more beautiful when all of these other people who are revitalizing their cultures and who used to be trade partners and stuff are kind of helping bring that image together as a whole. And I think that's maybe one of the things I love most about it. Like my thoughts of my grandpa, and then community building with, you know, with Leah and with Miu and with Kara. It was just a really tremendous experience. So.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. The picture is really amazing. That's an amazing photo that she captured. I don't know how you did that. I don't think I would have been able to
Photoshop
at all. But it's an amazing picture. And like, do you know, maybe you didn't or maybe you weren't involved in this part of it, but like the actual pieces, like that picture, that image of you floating in the water, your play on the Hollywood sign, like how did they actually, you know, did she just through the grant funding just like pay a company to like put those up on those billboards, or do you even know any of that stuff?
I think that's kind of what she did. Yeah, she kind of sought out different billboard companies and tried her best to like use what the grant funds were, and then, you know, as far as retail space, what they call retail space in LA, pick places that were high visibility but were also like relevant to the work. So it wasn't just my photo in the Tongvaland. It was also photos of multiple people from the Tongva community. So we had El Frank and River Garza. They contributed some art pieces that were on billboards. And then Mitzla and Mercedes Dormi were both shot by Kara. In Mitzla was shot at Pavugna, and then Mercedes was shot at Karavugna Springs, which are both, you know, our sites. And so I think the way that she sort of laid them out was to kind of give a nod to those spaces, or, you know, give a nod. There was an airplane in Mitzla's piece in the background. You see this like 747 jet, which I just love because it's so, you know, the definition of Los Angeles, these beautiful spaces, and then you have the giant plane. But yeah, like she was in charge of laying them all out and getting them on the places that they were at.
I think what people don't really realize is when you're taking pictures, when a photographer's taking pictures of you, how difficult it is, especially when you're not a trained person, like, you know,
Oh yeah, and then you're underwater
right?
too. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's not our
whole
work.
thing. We couldn't even talk to one another. We had developed like head nods, and so she would like do this like breath thing because we had to be trained by the guy that had the pool for breathing techniques. Because when you're down there, you can't just take a breath. You have to literally get rid of all of the oxygen in your lungs. So it's like a three to five breath sort of situation, which is very much like free diving, which I tripped out on, with my grandpa. But yeah, so we were communicating non-verbally the entire time. We had hand gestures and head nods to do the entire thing until, like, if I needed a break, that was when we talked. And I was in the water, I think about 12:30 or 1 in the afternoon. And then when we finally wrapped, it was like around 5 or 6. And I was in the pool most of the time, except for, once a break to get some tea and stuff to warm up. But yeah, it's exhausting. It's like really... you're going, I don't even know how many times or how many photos she shot, because she would only be able to get maybe 1 to 3 images, I think, every dive down. And if the lighting was off, or her, if something was in the way of my face, or if the skirt decided to sort of float up, and it was often doing that. So we had this situation where every time I went down, I'd have to hold the skirt down so it wouldn't flare up. And then once it was down, then like act natural for like 3 shots and then go back up for air.
Yeah.
So yeah, the actual reality of shooting that piece, as effortless as she made it look, with the end result, it was like, I don't even know how she pulled it off.
Yeah, for sure, right?
But
well,
yeah.
I mean, that's why we have artists, right? Like her, like yourself, to do the things that we feel are probably impossible to do if that's not the skill set of things to actually accomplish, right? And to get done. But it's like the a little bit before we move on to the next question, some of the intention that you share there, around Kara's like the direction she wanted to go, how she picked places, proximity to your sacred site, those kinds of things. And if I heard you correctly, I think one of the photo shoots you said was on those lands, right? Of what's it called? Tovaangar, right?
Tovaangar, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mitso's piece. I think they shot on the bluffs of Tovaangar, down there, yeah.
Yeah. So, these are the things often that people don't really understand about, artists and the work they put in, like some of those things that maybe you don't see it literally in the art and that photo. But, it's the work that the artist does, leading up to this thing that you wind up seeing, and that people hopefully appreciate once they hear and learn about those things. Right. So that makes me want to, ask a little bit about, some of the, you mentioned this a little bit earlier too, but, didn't go too far into it around, people's appreciation for what they saw, the art, not just, not only yours, although that's what we're talking about today is your art piece, but the whole art installation project in general that Kara put together that was out there. I believe it was like just a couple of months, right? That it was out there for public viewership. So what was some of the response? What were some of the great things you heard from people in response to coming across those, whether they knew it or didn't know it was going to be there?
Yeah. Overall, I think it was very supportive and very positive, the response from not only our community, but people outside of the community. It sort of sparked a lot of conversation too, in regards to what we talked about at the beginning of the interview of the term Tongva and the term Gabrielino, and, who uses what's common in today's sort of format. And so they weren't necessarily negative, conversations, but I really think it sort of just made people have those conversations, which I think had been sort of ignored or stayed away from prior to these things happening, because it had always been like, oh, that's the sensitive thing that we don't talk about. So it was really kind of neat to see that and see people from the other bands of our community being so supportive of the work that we had done. I also think that for the people that were, not part of our community, it really was impactful to them. Like some of them were familiar with Kara's work, or, one of the people in the photos, or like my Tongvaland piece. And then they're seeing it like on the street. And so they were really excited. And I was having people send, I took a picture of the thing and like tagging me on Instagram, which was really neat. I was really, really busy and also really terrified to go down there and see it in person. And so I actually never got to see them in person. I've only seen them through other people's photos, which is kind of a weird thing. But yeah, I had like one weekend where I was going to maybe try to go down there, and then something came up and I was just like, I can't do it this weekend. So And then they were only up shortly because of like time and money and space and everything else. They have to pay every month for the billboards. But for what it was, I think the response was really positive, and we were really grateful for the news organizations that sort of did little write-ups about it and stuff to bring people's awareness to it. Because some people didn't even know what it was. They were just like, what is this? And people were asking online, like, what's Tongva? Like, yeah. So
yeah, for sure. I could imagine that happening, right? Hopefully those people will go do like a simple search of like, what is even that word, right? Because having the A and the V and the A in there is, not standard English, right? So then people like somebody not write something correctly there. So hopefully that like sparks some of those people to, go and see what that means, right? Especially for people who live in LA and have come up through the public education system and probably have never even heard that, right? Because they probably most likely would have heard Gabrielena if they even heard that, maybe, but the possibility of them even hearing that specificity. So then hopefully, my hope would be that people would go and try to figure out like, what does that mean, because, it's important for people to start to hear, I have an aunt that, I used to go visit in LA from Texas when I was little, and she probably still doesn't know to this day what you and I are talking about.
A lot of people don't, though. A lot of people don't. And the fact that, we haven't had like a defined term for a very long period of time. It used to be the Mission Indians, and then it went from Mission Indians to the Indians of San Gabriel Mission, and then it went to Gabrielino, and then Mission Band of San, all these various things have, iterations have just like transferred over the years. And so there's never been like one, this is the term that we use, Yeah. So I'm grateful that, I hope that people use the internet. You have all this information at your fingertips now. You don't have to look it up in a book. That they do learn these things, and they do ask questions too, and try to figure out like, okay, why are there communities that some of them go by this term and some go by these other terms? Like, that's an important part of who we are as people, and having those conversations and sort of dissolving all of this narrative and stuff, because they need to understand that we're more complex than a single term. They need to understand that there was 200 villages in Los Angeles, and that we could have come from various, many of them. And they also need to understand that ties into how the mission system came in, pulled from some of the largest villages and decimated those villages, with either disease or with genocidal tactics. There's lots of different histories depending on which villages you sort of look up. Like Los Angeles in itself, like you go to Topanga, that's from our village site of Topanga. Cahuenga, which is another common one. Coahuila is the original village site near the Hollywood Hills. Wow. So a lot of the Azusa was one of our village sites, and now it's people don't know those things, and there's a story and a history with all of those things, and a lot of them kind of get carried on through the years, but the stories get lost, and when the stories get lost, the people lose the meaning of those things. So hopefully it makes people use their internet in ways that they, instead of scrolling and liking things.
Well, that's great to hear. Okay, so here at the Mixed Space, right, obviously with the title of our company and our organization, right, we are, we are not exclusive, but we do have, the intent of trying to capture the audience that is people who come from mixed identities, right, and mixed backgrounds, mixed ethnicities, and so on. So that in particular, but also in general, like what would you think that mixed Indigenous people in particular, like what would be something you would want them to know in relation to this art piece in particular that you worked on? In general, the whole project, but in particular, your art piece,
I would say that I would like them to know that I'm a mixed Indigenous person, that I identify with being Tongva and Scottish, but I also have other, tribal groups in sort of my genealogy history, as well as sort of the colonizer, the Spanish. I have European blood, Scottish blood and Gaelic blood off my mom's side of the family. So I would hope that they would, look into these things, and that would sort of inform such a complex history that I think many California Native people, especially, that are living today sort of stem from. So many of the tribal people today oftentimes do have Spanish, intermarried in their histories. And whether it was by choice or not, that's not necessarily sort of the important part. I mean, we're here because of those situations, whether or not they were sort of willingly gone into these matrimonial sort of relationships with people, or if they were forced marriages or out of wedlock type of situation. I mean, there's a lot of different situations, but those complexities kind of make up who we are. And those are the reasons that we're here today, whether we're doing art, whether we're making music, writing, whether we're just being parents. Like, those are all important things that I think a lot of us share. And I think that, growing up, I never really knew how to talk about those things. And I'm sort of learning now, because it was always sort of like, no, you're Indian only, you're this, and colonizers are bad. And, you have this very divisive sort of perspective on things. And you really can't, unfortunately, have those things. You can be against a lot of sort of the stuff that happened in the past. And I think that I am. I think that I sort of denounce certain things that went on because I think they are terrible things. However, I can't change those things. I can only sort of move forward in a way to maybe openly and honestly, discuss those to the best of my ability and sort of show how they inform the work that I do. So yeah, I hope that people, when they see my art, that's sort of the takeaway. It's a little bit more complex than just a black and white narrative of Native people and, colonizing entities coming in, and that's it. Because there's so much more to all of these stories in the background that are things I think we need to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's a great response to the question. You do. I wouldn't want anyone listening to this to think that you just do digital art, right? Like your Tongvaland piece, right? Because you do much more than that as well, right? Comic books, illustration, writer, children's books that I've seen you, numerous children's books I've seen your name on, right? And then I also say, just as importantly, and you have to be artistic in this as well, is your parenting, being a mother to kids, right? You have to get a little crafty sometimes there as well.
Oh yeah.
And then also, I think the other important work that you do I think I would call it gathering of artifacts, all this energy you put into trying to find artifacts either of your people or of any indigenous people, right? And gathering those things and trying to get them to a home, maybe we could call it, right? Maybe it's not the original home, but getting it into a place where it's not in the hands of people probably who shouldn't have those items any longer,
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that being said, as we get ready to close up here, with all of those other things, right, that you do and that you participate in that are part of your unique artist identity, let people know where they can find you. What are some of the places they can go and support your work, right? And especially if you can just tell a little bit about that art piece that you just released yesterday, or maybe the day before, for a special relative of ours who's no longer with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all that. And so many of these things I sort of get my hands into. It's because I care about those things. It's not like I maybe actively pursued trying to get baskets home to people. It was just like, oh, I'm kind of interested in weaving, like, oh, wow, look at this history. And then it just snowballs from there,
Mm-hmm.
I think I try to be honest, and I try to move forward in a positive way, in some of the only ways that I know how to through my art. So if you are interested in following any of the stuff that I do, you can find me. My hashtag is my first name, Weshoyot, Weshoyot. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at weshoyot.com. That's my website, where you can see a lot of the past work that I've done, interviews, and also purchase prints and original art. Most recently, I did a piece for P22, which was the cougar that unfortunately was put down, who had lived out in the Hollywood Hills solo for many, many years. And another piece that it was sort of just an emotional reaction to everything that was going on, and how people really like to separate sort of human beings from the natural world. You know, seeing him as sort of just an animal entity and not as something greater than that. For us, he was a relative. We consider animals and plants and every, you know, living thing, the land, it's all a relative, and it's all part of that sort of worldview and balance of how we go about our day to day, and also the effects of everything that's going on in the world right now with environmentalism, with pollution, with gentrification, with land loss. Unfortunately, plants and animals suffer the same thing that we do as Indigenous people. And so I just released a print sort of on the piece that I did. It's available on my website, sort of just as a response of who he was, and I think how we need to think about sort of these creatures that we're impacting so much.
Yeah, for sure. And if someone wants to buy your Tongvaland art, is it still available at, correct me if I'm wrong, or if I'm correct here, hopefully I am, Society 6, right? Do you still have that account?
Yeah.
You can purchase multiple pieces of art, right? But in particular, if anyone listening to this is curious or interested in having something in relation to that specific art piece that says Tongvaland, people can buy stickers, if I recall right, mugs, lots of different options, right, of things to purchase.
Yeah, I have it on like tote bags and shirts and stuff in case you want to just rock it in LA and like go up to the Hollywood sign and take a picture. But
yes,
I get a lot of requests, and I don't like to have a lot of, you know, superficial merchandise, but I think stuff like that's kind of important. And the products are pretty good quality. Like I have a pencil case that I use, and I use it as my wallet, and it's held up pretty good. So they do good quality products.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's great. I want people to make sure that they go out and support, find the art pieces from you that they like. I have shirt, posters from you, a few other things, stickers. I love the stickers, which I've got it on Society 6. I love the stickers. I've given them out. I've given stickers out to people, and you know, handed them off to others because I think
thank you.
Important. Yeah, important as well. So yeah, well, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for spending this time with us here. I know you got a cat that's trying to get your full, not just partial. Not just your partial. Let me touch you over here with my arm.
I know. I'm like, if I keep, I'm playing with him with my pens to keep him away from.
Yeah, well, he's gonna think it's playtime. Then you keep.
Oh yeah.
He's like, oh, here we go. Thank you to Weshoyot for sharing her time and having this conversation with us today. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to support her by following, liking, and subscribing to her social media platforms, and even consider purchasing some of her art. And remember, at the Mixed Space, you are always whole, never half. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and follow the Mixed Space on all of our social media platforms.